In the quiet town of Red Willow, whispers carried faster than the wind through the streets. The townsfolk, with their narrow minds and rigid expectations, had already decided the fate of a young woman named Clara. She was plump, with soft curves and round cheeks that flushed easily, and the town's men, obsessed with shallow beauty, had long dismissed her. "No one marries a fat girl," they murmured, shaking their heads as she passed by. But Clara had a gift, one that went unnoticed by most. She could cook. Her hands could transform simple ingredients into meals that warmed hearts, filled stomachs, and brought comfort to even the grimmest of souls. Clara's love for cooking had been passed down from her mother, who had always told her, "It's not the shape of your body that matters, child, but the shape of your heart. That is what nourishes the world." Yet, as she grew older, Clara could not help but feel the sting of rejection. Invitations to dances and town gatherings were scarce, and proposals even scarcer. She had watched sisters and neighbors marry handsome men, while she remained on the sidelines. Her only consolation, the smell of fresh bread and simmering stews in her small kitchen. The day had come when Clara decided she could no longer wait for someone to see beyond appearances. A marriage fair was being held on the outskirts of town, a place where hopeful brides presented themselves, and men, armed with prejudice and pride, chose wives. Clara's heart raced as she walked through the wooden gates, carrying a basket of her finest pastries. Her stomach twisted with anxiety. She knew the town's rules were cruel, yet she refused to let her spirit break. As she set her basket on the table, arranging the sweet treats with care, she noticed a man standing apart from the crowd. He was unlike anyone she had ever seen in Red Willow. His skin was weathered from the sun, his eyes dark and steady, observing everything with a calm precision. He did not laugh at the jokes of the other men, nor did he whisper cruel comments about the brides. There was a quiet dignity about him, an air of someone who lived by his own rules rather than the shallow judgments of society. Clara could not help but feel both nervous and drawn to him. When her turn came to speak, she drew a deep breath, trying to steady the tremor in her voice. "No one marries a fat girl, sir," she said, her eyes locking with his, "but I can cook. I can make meals that will warm your home, your family, even your heart. If you give me a chance, I promise I will not disappoint you." A hush fell over the fair. The other men laughed, some snorting, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Clara felt a flush of embarrassment, but the man did not flinch. He did not laugh. He did not turn away. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if weighing her words, as if seeing into her very soul. For the first time, Clara felt her heart lift with a glimmer of hope. Perhaps he understood what no one else did. That value could not be measured in pounds or inches, but in courage, kindness, and the ability to give of oneself freely. The rest of the crowd continued to murmur and gossip, but the young woman barely noticed. Her attention was fixed entirely on the man whose silence spoke louder than any words. She could feel something shift in that moment, a subtle promise that her life might not be defined by society's cruelty, but by the quiet choices of someone willing to look deeper. As Clara waited for his response, her stomach churned with nervous anticipation, every fiber of her being screamed with a mix of fear and hope. Little did she know that this quiet, observant Apache man's answer would not only change the course of her day, but the entire trajectory of her life. The crowd at the marriage fair had grown restless. They whispered behind their hands, their voices sharp with judgment. Some of the men scoffed openly at Clara's boldness, muttering cruel remarks about her size and daring. Yet through all the chatter, one figure remained calm, almost impossibly still. The Apache man, tall, broad-shouldered, and with eyes that seemed to see through the surface of things, did not speak. He simply watched, his gaze steady and unreadable. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to read his expression. Was he amused, curious, indifferent? The uncertainty made her stomach twist, but she refused to let fear take control. She straightened her back, trying to appear confident despite the heat of embarrassment rising to her cheeks. She had spoken honestly, laid bare her worth in the simplest way she knew, through her hands, her skills, her courage to step forward when no one else would. And yet, she had no idea if it had been enough. The Apache's silence was deliberate, commanding even. He made no grand gestures, no exaggerated movements to draw attention to himself. He did not join the laughter of the other men, nor did he look away in disdain. Instead, he simply studied Clara. His eyes, dark and unwavering, seemed to weigh every part of her words, her posture, the quiet strength behind her voice. It was a look that penetrated deeper than any glance she had ever received, making her feel as though every flaw and virtue alike were being acknowledged and accepted. Around them, the fair continued with its noisy chaos. Brides arranged their finest dresses, offering smiles and curtsies to men who barely looked at them. Men made their selections with superficial judgments, many glancing at appearances and wealth rather than character. But the Apache man remained apart, unshaken by the expectations of the crowd. His stillness contrasted sharply with the bustling disorder around him, drawing Clara's attention like a magnet. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Clara could feel the sweat prickling at her temples, her hands clenching and unclenching at her sides. She began to wonder if she had misjudged him, if he would dismiss her like the others. Her mind raced with doubts. Was I too bold? Too honest? Too fat to matter? Yet deep down, she felt a flicker of hope strange. Fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, someone could see her for who she truly was. Finally. The Apache man moved, but it was a small movement, a subtle nod of his head. It was not a grand gesture, not an exclamation, not a speech. It was almost imperceptible, yet to Clara it spoke volumes. It was acknowledgement. It was consideration. It was recognition that she had something more than appearances to offer, and that perhaps her words had touched a part of him that the crowd would never reach. Clara's heart leapt, though her lips remained sealed. She dared not speak, fearing that any sound might break the fragile moment. Around them, the whispers continued, the laughter persisted, but for Clara, it all seemed distant now. For the first time, someone's attention felt meaningful, not judgmental, not superficial, but deliberate, thoughtful, and real. The Apache man's eyes lingered on her. And though he did not yet speak, Clara felt an invisible thread connecting them. It was as if he were saying, I see you. I hear you. You are not invisible. The weight of that recognition, simple as it was, felt heavier than any criticism she had ever endured. As the fair moved on and other suitors turned away, distracted by more conventional choices, Clara realized that the moment she had feared most, being judged, dismissed, overlooked, might instead be the beginning of something extraordinary. The silence of the Apache man was not emptiness. It was potential. And in that potential, Clara sensed the faint glimmer of a life that could be different, a life in which she might be valued for her heart, her courage, and her skill rather than the size of her body. The Apache man's nod lingered in Clara's mind long after the fair had ended. She could feel the weight of his silent acknowledgement pressing against her chest, not as a burden, but as a challenge. He had seen her, truly seen her, in a way that no one else ever had. And somehow, that was both exhilarating and terrifying. What did he expect of her? What measure of her character had he glimpsed in that brief encounter? And what proof would she have to offer to meet it? A few days later, he returned not in the bustle of the town fair, but quietly at the edge of her kitchen. He had come alone, his presence commanding yet unobtrusive. If you wish for me to consider more than your words, he said, his voice calm and deliberate. "Show me what is in your heart. Cook for me. Not just to feed me, but to tell your story." Clara blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "My story?" she asked. He nodded. "I do not need fine clothes or charm. I need to see your spirit. Let your hands speak." At first, she felt a flicker of doubt. How can a meal tell a story? How can I pour my heart into food in a way that will be seen? But then she remembered her mother's words. It's the shape of your heart that nourishes the world. Perhaps this was the chance to prove that she was more than appearances. She set to work immediately. She chose ingredients with care, each one meaningful. Fresh vegetables from the garden, herbs she had dried herself, a loaf of bread kneaded with her own hands. She worked quietly, letting her thoughts drift back to every hardship she had endured, the whispered insults, the cold stares, the countless moments of being overlooked. She folded those experiences into her cooking, seasoning each dish with patience, hope, and resilience. When the meal was ready, the Apache man sat at her simple wooden table. The aroma of the food filled the small kitchen, rich and comforting. Clara placed each dish in front of him, explaining with a shy but steady voice the story behind each ingredient. "The bread is my perseverance," she said softly, "for it rises even when pressed down. The stew is my compassion, for it warms and nourishes all who partake of it. And these herbs," she added, a small smile breaking across her face, "are my dreams carefully tended, even when no one notices." The Apache man tasted the food slowly, deliberately, savoring each bite. He did not speak, not even a word, but his eyes softened. Each glance, each pause, seemed to acknowledge what Clara had offered, not just a meal, but her essence. She felt exposed, yet strangely empowered. In this simple act of cooking, she was seen in a way that went far beyond her appearance, beyond the judgment of the town, beyond every fear that had plagued her. Finally, he set down his spoon. He leaned back in his chair, letting a faint smile touch his lips. "You have honesty in your hands," he said, "and courage in your heart. That is what matters. The world often overlooks these things, but I do not. You have proven yourself." Clara felt a rush of relief and triumph. Her heart lifted, buoyed by the realization that her worth was not determined by the cruel standards of Red Willow. In the quiet, steady acknowledgement of this man, someone who saw beyond appearances, she found validation that no laughter or scorn could ever give. The townsfolk, unaware of the quiet transformation taking place in that modest kitchen, continued their lives, judging and dismissing as they always had. But for Clara, everything had shifted. The act of cooking, once a simple necessity, had become her voice. Through it, she had revealed her spirit, and the Apache man had seen it. And in that recognition, the seeds of trust and perhaps something deeper had been planted. For the first time in her life, Clara felt that she might not just survive in this world, but flourish, and that someone could see her for exactly who she was, without compromise or judgment. The days after Clara's test passed in her small kitchen were quiet, yet charged with an unspoken tension and curiosity. The Apache man, whose name she still did not know, did not immediately return to the public eye of the town. Instead, he remained an enigma, appearing only at the edges of Clara's world, observing, listening, and silently assessing. Each time he arrived, Clara felt her heart race. She had never experienced someone who regarded her with such deliberate attention, who seemed to weigh her soul rather than her appearance. Their first real conversation began hesitantly, over the preparation of a simple meal. He had offered to help, not out of necessity, but as a gesture of companionship. Clara was wary at first, unsure whether this calm, stoic man would expect her to conform to some rigid standard she could not meet. But as they worked side by side kneading dough, chopping vegetables, Seasoning meat, she began to sense that he did not see her as the town saw her. He did not laugh at her curves, nor did he make any judgment about her weight. Instead, he asked questions, simple ones, about her life, her family, and her dreams. Clara hesitated at first, unused to such genuine interest. "I've always loved cooking," she said, her voice soft but steady, "because it feels like the one place I can give something real. Something from my heart that matters." He nodded thoughtfully. "It matters," he said. "What you give freely, without expectation, is more valuable than anything earned by pride or wealth." The words were strange to her ears. In Red Willow, value was measured in looks, status, and the possessions one could flaunt. But here, in the calm presence of this Apache man, the rules of the town seemed irrelevant. He measured worth differently by courage, honesty, and kindness. As they worked, Clara began to share more than just her talents. She told him about the teasing, the whispered judgments, the nights she spent alone while others celebrated. The Apache man listened without interruption, never offering pity, never judging. His quiet understanding was unlike anything she had known. It was not condescending, but affirming. He did not minimize her pain, nor did he try to fix it. Instead, he acknowledged it, and in that acknowledgment, Clara felt a warmth she had longed for all her life. For his part, the Apache began to reveal pieces of himself. He spoke of his travels, the lands he had seen, and the people he had met. He shared lessons learned from observation and survival, never boasting, but speaking with the calm authority of someone who had endured hardships and emerged wiser. Clara found herself drawn to his steadiness, the way he faced the world with quiet integrity, unshaken by gossip or shallow judgments. There were minor obstacles, of course. A few townsfolk would pass by the open kitchen window, snickering or whispering cruelly about the unusual pair. Some questioned why she spent time with an outsider, while others doubted the sincerity of the Apache man's interest. Clara felt the sting of judgment briefly, but each glanced toward him. Each shared smile over a perfectly kneaded loaf of bread reminded her that their connection existed beyond the narrow limits of Red Willow's opinions. By the time the meal was finished, the conversation had deepened. Laughter slipped through naturally now, along with comfortable silences that spoke volumes. Clara realized that for the first time in her life, someone treated her not as a body to judge, but as a person to understand. The connection that had begun with a meal, a simple test of her character, had grown into something more profound: trust. And trust, Clara understood, was the soil from which deeper feelings could grow. As the Apache man finally stood to leave, he looked at her with a steady, quiet intensity. "You have courage," he said, "and patience. You have a heart that many overlook. That is rare." Clara felt a flutter in her chest, both hope and fear mingling. She did not yet understand where this path would lead, but she knew that something fundamental had shifted. For the first time, she felt that connection was possible, not dictated by society, but by the recognition of the soul. And in that recognition, she sensed the faintest promise that her life might finally change. Life in Red Willow had grown quiet, almost deceptively so. Clara and the Apache man had found a rhythm, a subtle understanding between them that neither words nor glances fully captured. But peace in such a town was often fleeting, and the quiet days could easily give way to chaos. It happened on a late autumn afternoon. The sky, once pale and calm, darkened suddenly as clouds rolled in from the mountains. A storm was brewing, strong winds whipping through the streets, rattling shutters and sending leaves swirling in frantic eddies. Most townsfolk hurried to their homes, clutching belongings and muttering prayers against the wind. Clara, busy in her kitchen preparing a meal for a neighbor, paused and glanced outside. The sight of a small child trapped in the whipping wind, holding on to a precarious pile of firewood made her heart lurch. Without thinking, she ran into the storm, her skirts clinging to her legs, hair plastered to her face. The wind tore at her, but she pressed forward, calling out to the child. "Hold on, I've got you," she shouted, her voice almost lost in the roar of the storm. The child's grip was weakening, panic clear and wide, tear-filled eyes. From the doorway of her kitchen, the Apache man had been watching. His instincts, honed by years of survival and experience, kicked in immediately. He followed her without hesitation, his presence steady and unwavering amidst the chaos. Where Clara's movements were frantic and emotional, his were precise, calculated, and strong. He reached the child first, his hands lifting the trembling little figure to safety, while Clara worked to secure the firewood pile and calm the child's frantic sobs. The storm raged on, but together they managed to guide the child back to the warmth and safety of home. Neighbors peeked from behind shutters, whispers of admiration and disbelief rippling through the town. Clara's bravery had been evident, but the sight of the Apache man calmly protecting the child added a new dimension to the unfolding story. Many had assumed he was an outsider without care for the town or its people. But here he was, quietly heroic, working alongside her. Without fanfare or expectation of recognition. After the storm subsided, they returned to Clara's kitchen, soaked and exhausted. She leaned against the counter, shivering but smiling, while he removed a jacket from his shoulders to cover her. "You were brave," he said quietly, his eyes locking with hers. Not many would run into the storm when fear might have kept them safe. Clara felt a flush of pride mixed with humility. I couldn't just let the child be in danger," she admitted. "It felt wrong to stand by." He nodded, studying her with that steady intensity she had come to recognize. Courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, persistent. Today, you have shown both. For the first time, Clara realized that their bond was no longer just about meals and words. It was forged in action, tested by real danger, and strengthened by mutual courage. The storm had exposed something deeper within her, and in witnessing it, the Apache man's respect for her had grown. And she, in turn, saw his strength not only in skill but in character, in the way he chose to act without seeking approval or reward. As the evening settled over Red Willow, the townsfolk began to murmur, seeing Clara in a new light. She was no longer just the fat girl who cooked. She was brave, resourceful, and kind. And the Apache man, whose presence had always intrigued her, now stood as a symbol that her life could change in ways she had never imagined. Sitting together by the fire that night, wet clothes drying around them, Clara felt a quiet thrill of hope. The connection between them had grown, strengthened not by words alone but by shared experience. She realized with a mixture of awe and relief that for the first time in her life, someone had witnessed her true self and had chosen to stay. And in that silent understanding, Clara sensed that the storm outside had not just tested her courage, it had also tested the possibility of love, trust, and a life transformed. The warmth of the fire that night could not fully shield Clara from the reality of the world outside her kitchen. The bond she had begun to form with the Apache man, forged in shared courage and quiet understanding, now faced a new challenge: the prejudices and narrow-mindedness of Red Willow itself. In this town, difference was often met with suspicion, and the sight of Clara, a plump young woman, spending time with an outsider stirred gossip and disapproval. It began subtly. At the market, neighbors whispered as she passed, their eyes sharp with judgment. "Why does she linger with that Apache?" They muttered. "Does she forget her place?" Children giggled, parroting the cruel remarks of adults. Even some of the men who had once dismissed Clara as marriageable now stared with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. Unable to reconcile her courage with their shallow expectations, the Apache man, for his part, seemed unbothered outwardly. But Clara could sense a quiet tension in him whenever they were in public. He moved with the calm of someone accustomed to scrutiny, yet she noticed the subtle protective gestures, guiding her away from crowded streets, standing close when gossiping neighbors lingered too long, or speaking in measured tones to diffuse confrontation before it escalated. One afternoon, a group of local men confronted Clara directly. They sneered at her, mocking both her size and her connection to the outsider. "What do you see in him?" one asked, his voice loud enough for others to hear. "He's no one here. You're letting yourself be foolish." Clara's first instinct was fear and old, familiar panic, but she remembered the lessons of the storm of courage and resilience. She squared her shoulders and looked the man in the eye. "I see someone who values honesty, kindness, and courage," she said, her voice steady despite the flush of anger rising in her cheeks. "I see someone who doesn't judge me for my appearance as so many others have. That is worth more than anything you can offer." The men scoffed, but the firmness in her tone surprised even them. They had expected meekness or tears, not conviction. In that moment, Clara felt a sense of empowerment she had never known, as though standing up for herself had shifted not only the dynamics of the confrontation, but also the perception of those watching. The Apache man's role in this cultural clash was subtle, but pivotal. He did not engage in confrontation with aggression. Instead, he used quiet authority. When necessary, his presence alone was enough to make the gossiping townsfolk pause, reconsidering whether their judgment truly held weight. Clara began to understand that strength could take many forms, not all of it loud or violent. Some of it was quiet, steadfast, and unwavering. Even within their growing partnership, cultural differences posed challenges. Clara was accustomed to the rhythms and rules of Red Willow, while the Apache man carried customs and values shaped by lands far beyond the town's borders. At times, small misunderstandings flared, differences in manners, expectations, or priorities, but each time, they approached the issues with patience and dialogue rather than anger. These moments, though tense, deepened their understanding of one another. Clara learned humility and flexibility, while the Apache man recognized the courage it took for her to assert herself in a world that often dismissed her. By the end of the week, the town had begun to notice a subtle shift. Clara no longer appeared timid or easily swayed by judgment. The Apache man's calm presence lent her an air of respectability in the eyes of even the harshest critics. Their partnership, built on mutual respect and quiet understanding, started to challenge the town's assumptions, not with force, but with consistency, courage, and integrity. For Clara, the cultural clash was both daunting and transformative. She was learning that love and connection required not just trust between two people, but the courage to face a world that might not understand. And in that courage, she began to see the first glimmers of a life not dictated by prejudice or fear, but by choice, respect, and the bond she shared with someone who truly saw her. The days in Red Willow had grown quieter, yet the tension that lingered from gossip and prejudice had not completely faded. Clara had learned to navigate the town's judgment with growing confidence, bolstered by her bond with the Apache man, whose steady presence had become a source of reassurance and strength. But until now, their relationship had remained unspoken in its deeper significance, a connection of trust, understanding, and shared courage, yet not openly declared. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the distant hills, painting the sky with streaks of gold and crimson, the Apache man invited Clara to accompany him on a walk outside the town limits. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the faint tang of autumn leaves. Clara's heart fluttered with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She could feel, instinctively, that something important was about to unfold. They walked in silence at first, the crunch of leaves beneath their feet the only sound. Clara stole glances at him, noticing the way the fading light highlighted the contours of his face, the quiet strength in his posture, the steadiness in his eyes. It was the same intensity that had drawn her in from the start, the same gaze that had first acknowledged her worth when no one else would. Finally, he stopped at the edge of a small clearing. The wind was calm here, and the world seemed to hold its breath. He turned to face her, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence stretching like a delicate thread. Then, with a deliberate calm, he began. "You have shown me something rare," he said, his voice deep but gentle. "In a world that measures worth by appearances, you have revealed character, courage, kindness, honesty. These are qualities I value above all else." Clara felt a blush rise to her cheeks, partly from the warmth of the words, partly from the intensity of his gaze. She had expected acknowledgment, perhaps respect, but not this an open declaration that her very being mattered to him. "I do not care for what others say about you," he continued. "I do not care for the shallow measures of beauty that the town clings to. What matters to me is what I have seen, your heart, your strength, your spirit. That is why I wish to be with you, not as a convenience, not for any gain, but because I see your true self, and it is enough." Clara's hands trembled slightly as she processed his words. For the first time in her life, someone had expressed a desire to be with her not despite her appearance, but entirely because of who she was. She struggled to find words, overwhelmed by the depth of honesty and sincerity before her. "You mean, you truly value me?" she asked softly, barely daring to speak. He nodded. "I do. I value you for the life you bring, for the courage you show, and for the honesty in your heart. I have no interest in what the town expects or what others think. I want only you as you are." Tears prickled at the corners of Clara's eyes. It was a revelation she had never dared to imagine, that she could be loved truly and wholly without compromise, that someone could see past the superficial judgments and recognize the worth that she herself had sometimes doubted in that moment. The world outside the clearing, the whispers, the judgments, the shallow expectations of Red Willow faded into irrelevance. What remained was truth, clarity, and the first real glimpse of possibility, a bond not dictated by appearances or conformity, but by mutual respect, understanding, and the quiet, profound recognition of one another's souls. As they stood together in the fading light, Clara felt her heart shift. Fear and doubt began to loosen their grip, replaced by a sense of hope and courage she had never known. The Apache man's revelation of intent was more than a confession. It was an invitation to a life transformed, a chance to embrace love, respect, and partnership on her own terms. And in that shared moment, Clara knew that her life was changing in a way she had never imagined, and that the quiet, steady presence of the man beside her would guide her through whatever challenges lay ahead. The revelation of intent had brought a quiet joy to Clara's heart, but happiness in Red Willow was never free from challenge. As the bond between Clara and the Apache man became more visible, it drew the attention of those who could not accept difference, who could not bear to see someone defy the rigid social rules of the town. Whispers turned into pointed remarks, and murmurs became outright confrontation. It began with subtle jabs. Townsfolk would comment within earshot, "Why does she linger with that outsider? Doesn't she know better?" Children repeated the words with cruel innocence, mimicking the voices of adults. But soon, the opposition grew bolder. A man who had once shown interest in Clara, handsome, proud, and spoiled by the shallow adoration of society, began to make his displeasure known. He viewed her closeness to the Apache man as a personal affront and a threat to the rigid hierarchy of town relationships. One afternoon, as Clara and the Apache man were walking through the market, the rival suitor confronted them. His voice was loud, carrying across the stalls. "Clara, you're making a fool of yourself, pairing with someone who doesn't belong here. Have you lost your senses?" Clara's heart pounded, a mix of fear and determination rising within her. She glanced at the Apache man, who stood silently beside her, calm yet alert. She realized in that instant that she did not need to cower. He was not just a protector. He was her equal in courage and conviction. "I have not lost my senses," Clara said firmly, meeting the man's gaze. "I choose my own path. I choose someone who values me for who I am, not what society says I should be. And if you cannot understand that, it is your blindness, not my fault." The rival sneered, clearly offended by her defiance, but he was no match for the quiet authority of the Apache man. Without raising his voice, the man's presence alone conveyed strength and resolve. He stepped slightly forward, his dark eyes fixed on the suitor. "She is not yours to command. Respect her choices or step aside." The crowd of townsfolk paused, watching the tense exchange. Many had been quick to judge Clara in the past, but now they witnessed something they could not ignore: her confidence, her courage, and the unwavering support of someone who saw her true value. The whispers shifted from mockery to curiosity, as if the town were beginning to reconsider its assumptions. The opposition, however, did not relent easily. Rumors spread, warning of the consequences of a forbidden pairing. Some families tried to intervene, hoping to separate the two, citing tradition and societal expectation. Clara felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her, the old fears threatening to resurface. But each time doubt crept in, she remembered the storm. The test of character in her kitchen and the steady acknowledgement of her worth from the Apache man. Together, they faced these challenges with quiet resilience. Where others might have shouted or fought, they relied on patience, strategy, and the undeniable strength of their connection. Their unity became evident not through aggression, but through consistent action and mutual support. Every moment of shared courage, every demonstration of trust, made it clear that their bond was real and unbreakable. By the end of the week, the rival suitor retreated, frustrated and defeated by the unshakable strength of their partnership. The townsfolk, though slow to change, began to offer tentative respect. They could no longer deny that Clara, once dismissed and belittled, was a force in her own right, and that the Apache man's choice was grounded not in whim, but in true recognition of her worth. In the quiet that followed, Clara felt a deep sense of relief and triumph. The opposition had tested her, and she had emerged stronger, more confident, and more certain of the path she wished to follow. The bond she shared with the Apache man had been strengthened through adversity, proving that love, respect, and courage could withstand the harshest judgment and the loudest voices of a small town. And in that triumph, Clara realized that their connection was no longer fragile or tentative. It was a partnership forged through courage, trust, and an unwavering commitment to one another. Ready to face whatever trials lay ahead, the struggles and opposition of Red Willow had tested Clara, but they had also forged a strength within her that she had never known. The town that once dismissed her as too fat or unworthy was beginning to see her differently, not because she had changed her appearance, but because she had embraced herself fully and demonstrated the courage, skill, and heart that had always been inside her. Clara began to take pride in her cooking in a new way. No longer was it merely a tool for survival or a desperate bid for acceptance. It became a form of self-expression, a way to share her identity and values with the community. She experimented with recipes, blending traditional dishes with her own creative touches, each meal a reflection of her spirit. The Apache man, ever her steady companion, encouraged her and offered guidance when needed, never imposing his will, but always supporting her efforts. The townsfolk slowly began to notice. The same people who had once whispered cruel remarks about her weight now lined up for her food, marveling at its richness and depth of flavor. They saw the care she put into each dish, the attention to detail, and the warmth she infused into every meal. Slowly, admiration replaced mockery. Clara, once overlooked, was now respected not superficially, but for her skills, her courage, and the kindness she extended to others. Her transformation extended beyond her cooking. With the confidence she had gained from facing prejudice, storms, and societal opposition, Clara began to assert herself in other areas of life. She organized small community gatherings, helped those in need, and even mentored younger women who had felt overlooked or undervalued. Her presence became a symbol that courage and character mattered more than appearance or conformity. Through it all, the Apache man remained a quiet but powerful influence. He had been the first to see Clara's worth and had never wavered in his support. Together they became a visible pair of strength and harmony, demonstrating that partnership was built not on shallow ideals but on mutual respect, trust, and recognition of the true self. Their bond inspired others, showing that love could transcend prejudice and societal expectations. Clara herself began to feel a sense of liberation she had never imagined possible. She no longer measured her value by the narrow standards of the town. She wore her body with pride, moved through life with confidence, and spoke with the authority of someone who knew her worth. The reflection in the mirror was no longer a source of insecurity, but a reminder of her journey and the inner strength that had been forged through hardship and perseverance. The Apache man, seeing Clara blossom into her full potential, felt a deep sense of satisfaction and admiration. His choice to see beyond appearances and recognize character had not only brought Clara into his life, but had also affirmed the value of discernment, patience, and quiet observation. In witnessing her transformation, he understood that their connection had grown into something rare and profound, a partnership of equals, built on trust, respect, and love. As Red Willow gradually shifted in its perception of Clara, she also began to imagine a future that was once unimaginable. She saw herself thriving, contributing meaningfully to the community, and living in harmony with someone who truly valued her essence. No longer defined by prejudice or superficial judgment, Clara embraced a new identity, one rooted in confidence, compassion, and the courage to be unapologetically herself. The town, having witnessed her journey, began to reflect on its own narrow views. While some still clung to old judgments, many were inspired by Clara's transformation and the quiet strength of the Apache man beside her. Together, they had shown that true worth could not be dictated by appearances or societal expectations. It was revealed through actions, character, and the ability to remain steadfast in the face of adversity. As Clara looked at the life she had begun to build, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The girl who had once been dismissed and overlooked was now a woman of strength, dignity, and influence. And through it all, the Apache man's presence reminded her that recognition, love, and partnership were most powerful when grounded in honesty, respect, and the courage to see beyond the surface. The days in Red Willow had begun to feel lighter, calmer, and filled with a sense of possibility that had been unimaginable months before. Clara's transformation, the confidence she had forged through courage, perseverance, and the quiet support of the Apache man had left an indelible mark on the town. What had once been whispers of scorn had shifted, slowly but surely, into murmurs of respect. The townsfolk who had mocked her now watched with a mix of admiration and cautious acceptance. As she moved through life unapologetically, her presence radiant with self-assuredness, for Clara and the Apache man, the evolution of their bond had been gradual, strengthened by shared trials, quiet moments of understanding, and the unwavering recognition of each other's worth. They had faced prejudice together, braved storms, both literal and metaphorical, and emerged stronger than ever. Now their relationship had matured into something rare and profound, a partnership built on mutual respect, trust, and love that transcended societal expectations. One crisp morning, as the first light of dawn painted the hills in gold and amber, Clara prepared a meal not for the fair, not for the town, but for herself and the man who had forever changed her life. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread, herbs, and simmering stew, the aroma a testament to her skill and care. He entered quietly, his presence familiar yet still capable of making her heart flutter. No words were needed. The comfort between them spoke volumes. As they sat together, sharing the meal and exchanging soft laughter, the Apache man reached across the table. "Clara," he said, his voice steady but warm, "we have faced much together. And yet, I feel this is only the beginning. Will you continue this journey with me, not as an obligation, nor as a convenience, but as partners, equals, and companions for life?" Clara felt her heart swell. She had long feared that someone might never see her for who she truly was. Yet here he was, offering not just love, but an unwavering respect for her character, her courage, and her spirit. "Yes," she said softly, her eyes glistening with tears of joy. "Yes, I will. Together for life." Their union, though not traditional in the eyes of Red Willow, became a quiet symbol of defiance and inspiration. The townsfolk, witnessing the depth of their connection and the undeniable harmony between them, began to question their own shallow judgments.